Great. Thursday, December 2nd, call the MVP Executive Committee meeting to order. Alice, will you please call a roll to make sure we have a quorum present?
Nevada Fire District.
Here.
County of Marin.
Here.
City of Mill Valley.
Here.
Town of Ross.
Here.
City of San Rafael.
Here.
A quorum is present with all members.
Thank you, Allison. Thanks all. So this is time for public expression. This time the public's welcome to address the Executive Committee on matters not on the agenda that are within the jurisdiction of the committee. Please be advised that pursuant to government code, the committee is not permitted to discuss or take action on any matter not on the agenda. Comments be no longer than 3 minutes and should be respectful to the community. And please silence your cell phones during the meeting and mute your mic when not reporting out. Any public comment?
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there is no public comment.
Okay. Thanks, Allison. Thanks all. Okay, let's move to the Executive Officer's report. Mark Brown, please.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Let me do my screen share for you. Bruce, give me a thumbs up if everything's looking good.
Looks good.
All right. So let's talk weather again. Yeah, our last executive meeting, we talked about the historic amounts of rain that we got for October, the historic storm that we received. And I cautioned getting excited about the drought ending based on that historic day. And now we have been we had a few storms that were light, that had an inch or two, that were separated by a week or two. That was awesome for our fuel conditions. But now we have been in an extended drying period, and it looks to be a continued drying period. I did look at the next 3-month prediction, and they are still saying that we'll have an average or just below average rain year for the next 3 months, which is great news. But then the concerning part is that based on the drying period we've seen, I went ahead and dug into the fuel moistures for our dead fuel moistures at our 100 and our 1,000 hour fuel moistures. And the 100 hours, I mean, they both spiked and got quite moist following that rain. The 100 is already below average for this time of year. That's how fast it's dropping. In fact, it's almost back down to historic lows. The 1,000 hours are below average right now, but they're not quite at that historic low. So it just emphasizes that we need a consistent pattern of rain in order for us to get these fuels to where they're not going to be dangerously low. And as I keep emphasizing, 2 droughts separated by a rain year has really stressed our fuels, and it's going to take several rain years to get us past all of this. Moving on to COC recruitment, our Citizens Oversight recruitment ended yesterday. And we have a meeting set up with our ad hoc subcommittee for selection tomorrow. As a reminder, the positions are West Marin, Central Marin, and our civic organization. And I'm pleased with the number of applicants that we received. It's on par for, as far as, last year we were recruiting for all 9 positions and we had 30-something applicants. For 3 positions, we have 8 applicants. So if you multiply it out by 3, that means we would have been on pace for about 24 if we were recruiting for all 9. So I'm pleased with that number. And looking at the applications, I think we have some really great applicants in there. And finally, exciting news on the grant program. We are soft launching today. And part of the delays have been making sure that all of our member agencies' needs for the overall program have been met. We closed the loop on a couple of agencies yesterday, and we tried to do the soft launch yesterday afternoon, but the soft launch will be today. And depending on how well the soft launch goes, then we can do a full launch here within a week to 2 weeks. So we're very excited about being able to launch that program. We have a slate of meetings coming up week of December 13th. We have 5 Brown Act meetings that will occur that week. The first one is the Finance Committee. It will happen on Monday the 13th. And we will be bringing forward a procurement and purchasing policy update to what has been approved as a working draft so that the MWPA can function. But now we have a much more thorough procurement and purchasing policy. We will have also drafted a reserves policy for the Finance Committee's review. And then we have two minor budget adjustments to make. And that is simply rolling over unspent monies from two budget centers from last fiscal year into this fiscal year. We don't see right now a need to adjust any other of our budget items. And then we'll have the advisory, technical, and operations committees meeting Tuesday and Wednesday of that same week. That's going to be an opportunity for Ann to discuss with both those teams the process for building out the next year's work plan. We are also going to be getting their input and review for the objectives and metrics that have been drafted through the joint committee that had members from Ops and ATC building that. So that's where we're going to be able to get their feedback. And then we're also going to be giving a presentation for that you'll be receiving later today on the recommendations coming from the Strategic Ad Hoc Subcommittee to get their input and feedback from those recommendations. And then we have the Citizens Oversight and our regular board meeting. I mentioned the work plan portal. We are progressing well in the development of that. We had a meeting on it yesterday, saw some of the inside inner workings of how that's going to go. Build in a lot of logic features. And that was one of the frustrations last year, is that regardless of the type of application the person was putting in for, whether it, let's use public education as an example, they had to go through all the other questions that were related to veg management projects, or a veg management project had to go through things that were related to public education. We're building a logic system in that if you click that you're building a public education proposal, then you only get the questions for public education. If you're building a veg management proposal, you only get the questions for veg management. And then again, we're using the one touch principle, that the data is entered into the system, only has to be touched once, and it'll live through the end of the implementation of this project. Data wise, metric wise, funding wise, unless there's amendments, you won't have to touch that data again. So we're excited about that. And I'll close with, we did close out on the 29th, our application period or proposal period for our request for proposals and qualifications for our evacuation ingress egress risk assessment. We only received one packet. However, I do not think you could have built a better team than what was built, that was assembled to give us this proposal. With the single proposal, we are still going through the full evaluation process. I think it's even more important when you have only one proposal to go through that one process, because we still have to have the ability to say we evaluated it and it met our needs and we are getting our value for what is being, what we would be paying for. And speaking of paying for, when you assemble such a team like I'm mentioning, it's going to come with a price tag, and unfortunately it did come in over our expected budget. And that's another reason why we're going to have to be very thoughtful with our review to make sure that we are getting our bang for our buck. But we've already come up with some ideas how the proposal can be have some costs reduced by some partnerships with some other research that's going on. And we are also have already started and identified 2 or 3 different grant programs that we can start applying for planning oriented grants that can help fund this. And we think that there's going to be an appetite for granting agencies to fund this grant, because this is a first of its kind type product. And it's not just, it can be replicated in other areas. So there's a lot of benefit for the product that will be created through our RFP, that other agencies will be able to grab onto that work and make it useful for them. And with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for a thorough report. So from the questions from the committee, please. Julie, please.
Thank you, Mark. Just 2 really quick questions. I'm wondering if we wanted to see how the MWPA grant program is working, do we just go to the website and poke around there?
Yeah, if you go into our homepage, go up to the tab that says resident info, and then there's going to be resident grants. And then we are preparing a press release and social media releases so that when we do go live, we will publicize it quite well.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then the other question I had was, what was the amount that we were targeting for the evacuation risk assessment, and how much over is the RFP?
So we had set aside $1 million for the proposal, and it's more than double.
Oh, geez. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Great question, Julie. Other board members? Oh, Sashi, please. I see you have your hand up.
Thank you. Building on Julie's question on the grant program, Mark, are we thinking that residents are going to apply themselves, or are they going to apply through their member agencies? And is there an expectation that the member agencies would provide some assistance? I know that that people trying to apply for these things without any experience are going to need a lot more handholding. So just wondering whether that's been thought through.
It has, and that was actually part of the delays, is that we have the MWPA, JPA-wide grant programs, and then our member agencies also have individual grant programs within their jurisdictions. So there has to be a connection between the member agency and the MWPA. And we have worked very hard to make the application, which will go, the resident will apply, and it will apply direct through the MWPA. We have worked to connect the data that comes from a defensible space evaluation using our DSI app automatically populates a lot of their grant application information. It's connected by their APN. So much of the information will already be completed for the resident. Our connection with the member agencies will be include, I'll use Novato as an example. And Novato has a matching home hardening grant program. We have a home hardening program. Residents can apply to both the MWPA home hardening and the Novato home hardening, but what we need to confirm is that we are not double dipping, so that we aren't both paying for the same set of double pane windows. And to continue that same example, perhaps resident A used the matching grant from Novato Fire to put in their double pane windows, and then they used the MWPA home hardening grant to put in new vent screens. So that's that coordination that we'll have back and forth between the member agencies. Looking in the future, what I would like to do is design a grant program that meets all of our member agency needs, and then we can centralize it all within the MWPA. If that's not possible, and member agencies would like to still have something that is tailored to their individual communities, we have enough project space within our grant application that we can build the member agency grant application in through that portal that we have, and it'll be a one-stop shop for our residents. Sorry for the long answer, but
No, that's great. That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. And then on the also on the evacuation risk assessment, you take a stab at what you think it's going to cost, and if it turns out that it costs more, it costs more. But if it's greater value, and that's the value that we want, that's where your evaluation process is coming through. And so you commented that you wanted to be really thoughtful in the review. So there, I guess the question is, is there a possibility that you would come back when the review and say, look, we need to go back out again and we need to do this again? So it's not a done deal just because we got one proposal, we're taking it and we're just going to take whatever they say.
That's our attitude. It has to be proven that it is meeting the needs of the request for proposals and qualifications, and that there is good value to it. And if it's no to any of those questions, then we will go out again.
Okay, thank you.
Other directors' questions, please. Questions, comments? Mark, I've a couple of questions. One is on the COC applications first. When might we expect to get copies of those in advance of the meeting?
I sent them out 2 days ago.
You did?
Yes.
Okay. If you could, I did not see them. I've checked my email, so something's amiss here.
Okay, I'll make sure you, following this meeting, I'll make sure you have the packet.
Great, thanks. And then on the evacuation risk assessment, I understand we have the A team, and I think I know who those contractors are. And I understand it came in well above our estimation, which was a complete guess. It was an estimation. We just really, this has never been done before. So your statement, I really appreciate what you're doing. You're going through it. You're looking at, you know, the specific work that needs to be done, the deliverables of value, and you know, evaluating the applicant. My question is, and then you mentioned grants. So is there a possibility that this could be broken into phases? There's specific assessment needs that one is the hardscape, the transportation and infrastructure pinch points. Secondly is, you know, the evacuation runs and where things will be pinch and why. And then there's a fire simulation component to it, and evaluation of you know, of a rating system that's going to come up. I think it's fantastic, but might we think of phasing this into phase 1, 2, and you say grants? I mean, would that then provide an opportunity for ask for grants to fund, you know, subsequent phases that we're unable to fund ourselves? So that's just a question.
It's actually really easy. I would say easily possible by the way they structured the proposal and the timeline, and then the pricing structure. We can phase it in 2 different ways. We can phase it based on the timeline, but we could also phase it based on the task. And there could be grant streams that, let's use the transportation modeling and the people movement modeling portion of it. That is identified as a separate price point for within the grant or the proposal.
Right.
And then so we can use that value to go after transportation oriented grants. And or if it's the fire modeling, we can use that portion of it to go after wildfire related type grants.
Okay. And then alternately, I do think it's incumbent upon you all to, if you feel that the work plan is what we want and there's value, you can trim it down however you want. I think you have, of course, a license to come back to the executive committee and the board to ask for some supplemental funding. We have like $7 or $8 million in reserve right now, and I think we should, you know, let's stay light on our feet and keep this stuff moving.
I agree, but we'll be looking for opportunities to sharpen the pencil and get other funds to pay for it.
Okay, thanks very much. Other directors, questions, comments? Let's go to the pub. Oh, Julie.
Sorry, I'm just wondering how we evaluate this proposal, given that there's no precedent.
Great question. And we've already started that process. We had our first meeting with the review group on Tuesday. And we are going to, like I said, continue with that full process. It's going to include an interview process with the applicants and the selection committee. It will also include presentations to the exec committee and the board for final approval. And then we also have some resources in the educational world that we're going to tap into to give an evaluation on the wildfire side of it and then the transportation side of it.
That's great. I was hoping that there could be some outside expertise lent to you. That's great.
And thanks to Charlotte's research, we actually have some names identified to reach out to.
Nice. Great question, Julie. Other directors, questions, comments? Let's move to the public. Allison, please.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Okay, thanks, Allison. And all back to the committee for any further discussion? No, let's move on to item 6, which is the consent calendar. The opportunity for the public to comment on the consent calendar will occur prior to the committee's discussion of the calendar. The committee may approve the entire consent calendar with one action, or in alternative, items on the consent calendar may be removed by any committee or staff member for separate discussion and a vote. Let's see, I'll take public comment on consent calendar, please.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Okay, back to the committee. Any members wish to pull an item for discussion? I see no.
Move to approve.
Motion from Julie McMillan.
Second.
Second from Rachel. Thank you, Julie and Rachel. Allison?
Novato Fire District,
Aye.
County of Marin,
Aye.
City of Mill Valley,
Aye.
Town of Ross,
Aye.
City of San Rafael.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thanks, board. Thanks all. Let's move to committee reports. Item A, the ad hoc strategic subcommittee update. Mark, we're looking forward to this. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I'll kick it off then real quick and hand it off to Jean and Gabe, and then they'll pass it back to me. I did want to mention that the presentation that you're about to receive was uploaded to the agenda packet online last night at about 5. We would have liked to have gotten it to you earlier, but the content of that report did not get completed until the afternoon of Tuesday. And then we spent yesterday furiously going back and forth between the committee members to build the PowerPoint presentation that you're about to receive. So I would have really liked to have gotten it to you sooner before you see it today. But just the timing logistics did not allow for that. And so Jean, I'll pass it off to you.
Thank you, Mark. And I just want to express my appreciation for being able to participate with this strategic ad hoc committee. For the board members and the executive committee members, you picked an exceptional group of people to tackle these issues. And it was a real pleasure and a privilege to work with Gabe, with Rachel, with Bruce, with David Kimball, and who am I missing?
Captain Hilliard?
Catherine, yes, how could I miss Catherine? So as well as Mark Brown and Ann Krelock as our operational expertise. And this committee has met 4 times formally since early October. And as Mark mentioned, the last meeting was on Tuesday, where they took the collective wisdom of this group plus the information gathered to come up with the recommendations that are going before you this morning. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Gabe Paulson, who the Strategic Ad Hoc Committee asked him to open this session on their behalf. And Gabe, I turn it over to you.
Thank you. And yeah, great to see everybody here. I'll be very brief. I think I was picked because I was timed to go under 2 minutes, so I should be really short. Essentially, we met on Tuesday, as Jean said, and I wanted to just go over 4 points. One is reminding us what the purpose of the ad hoc was. 2 is what we ended up focusing on and considering our priority. 3 is what the core analysis and conclusions were, and then sort of the recommendation part I'll hand over to Mark. So our purpose really was to find any key challenges to our success at the end of this year. So it seems like we've had a good start. There's a lot to celebrate, but we wanted to see what real opportunities and threats, or whatever language you use, essentially, what do we need to succeed in 2022 and beyond? So that was our purpose. After looking at all kinds of different possibilities, we really honed in on one thing, and it was our conclusion that the greatest threat and challenge was not getting enough projects done to complete our mission. That's really the bottom line. And I just want to remind everyone in this meeting that we had a great November meeting where Ann gave us some metrics, and just to rattle off a couple, we've cleared 12 miles of fire roads, we've done 327 acres of shaded fuel breaks, 260 miles of roadside evac. I mean, that sounds like a lot. I know there are 13 miles or 33 miles in Larkspur, so 260, it sounds like a lot was cleared. But that being said, we just don't think we have the output we need. We just heard about the drought conditions and everything. So again, that was the issue. Given that was the question, this was our framing, and where we really were looking for staff recommendations. The real thing is looking at the identity and the purpose of MWPA. Are we a funding agency like TAM, or are we an implementer like Central Marin Sanitation? So if you think about it, we could really just be taking the 20 million and handing it over to people. And that would require a certain type of staff, accountants, and people involved with that transfer of funds. But if we're implementers, we're more like public works, where you have engineers and so forth. So even before we get into organization building, we had to settle that a little bit. And that became the driving question, which we gave to Mark and Ann to think about and to come back with us. And that's really where my report ends. So we identified the problem, we framed it, we had hours and hours of discussion, which we think are really digested well in the PowerPoint that Mark has. So Mark, I'll just hand it off to you from here.
Excellent. Thank you, Gabe. Well framed. And that question, are we funding or are we implementing? And by design, the JPA we're both. It was designed that we would be implementing for the core projects and that we would be a funding agency for the local mitigation projects, with a choice for member agencies for the defensible space, whether they wanted us to implement or fund. So by design, we're a little bit of both. So, but we want to look at a path to improve our implementation and become more efficient in implementing our MWPA projects. And we set out essentially 4 options, but we went with 3A, 3B because 2 of them are very, very similar. Option 1 is currently what we're doing. And I'll be honest with you, I have several of our member agencies coming to me saying, we cannot continue with this approach. And I'll give you an example. And I'll use San Rafael, and then I'm going to switch over to Central Marin with that example. We have numerous core projects that are in San Rafael. However, the MWPA does not have the staff to implement them. So MWPA through Ann and our Panorama team are doing environmental compliance for the core project that the City of San Rafael has designed. Once that the compliance has been completed, we give Kate Anderson a call and say, all right, Kate, it's approved. Here's the packet. And now Kate has to go through City of San Rafael's procurement procedures, find the appropriate vendor for the project, award that contract, then get it scheduled, handhold the contractor for the initial meeting, then do check-ins, make sure that they're working within parameters of the project. If there's any surprises that occur during the work, that it's Kate that has to go out there and manage that. Then she has to do the closeout. The contractor invoices Kate, City of San Rafael pays the invoice, and then the City of San Rafael sends MWPA an invoice to pay. So we have a lot of inefficiencies in there, and Kate actually has a much bigger workload that she already has, and implementing core projects is impacting her day-to-day duties for what she's supposed to be doing. We're following a similar approach in Central Marin for our evacuation route clearings. Now let's fast forward to next year when we have the Greater Ross Valley Shaded Fuel Break. The shaded fuel break that is going to cross across all of the jurisdictions within the Ross Valley. Can you imagine having work done by multiple contractors through multiple jurisdictions and using that type of system to implement that project? It's going to be fraught with inefficiencies. It could be that the town of Larkspur is funding work that gets done outside of the town, but then gets reimbursed. So that's one of the reasons why we would feel like centralizing might be a better approach. Option 2 is that member agencies start to use some of the core funding or local project funding to increase their staff in order to implement projects. That can create a lot of inefficiencies. You'll have people doing the same type of work. See people different agencies reaching out to different contractors and start getting into scheduling conflicts. It'll increase the bandwidth within the member agencies to get the work done. However, some of our smaller member agencies don't have enough of the core funding or the local mitigation funding to increase that employee bandwidth. And there could be an option for agencies to partner, but then you still have the challenge of one agency perhaps funding work that's being done in another agency's area, and then getting the middle person of the City of Larkspur pays a bill and then invoices MWPA to reimburse them for the bill that they paid. Option 3A is complete centralization of work within the MWPA, that all core projects would be funded and implemented through the MWPA. It creates tremendous amount of efficiencies. Our intent is to create a vendor list so that we don't have to go out to bid for every one of our contracts. Using our CUPCA guidelines, we can create a competitively bid contractor list. And so when it's time to go do work on an evacuation route project, we go down the list. All right, this vendor is going to go do this work. This vendor is going to go do that work over there. And we actually can create a relationship with all of our vendors that we become the preferred customer, and they start banking out time specific to our needs. And an option 3B, and that's the option that we recommend, is a blend. For the member agencies to have the bandwidth and the capability to increase their bandwidth, they can continue to manage their core projects. And then they can reach out to the MWPA for reimbursement. This gives the member agencies the flexibility, which a lot of the language in the JPA was designed to give our member agencies their own autonomy to do the work. But it also allows us to create that efficiencies through greater number of projects and create expert staff. So to look at that, we kind of have to redefine the roles or implementation and funding. And the green squares are really where the changes are that we're proposing. And you can see that building the work plan, and this is what I really like about what we're doing, the agencies are the agencies that are building the work plan, and it's MWPA that contributes to the construction of that work plan. But then the fund management, that's where we would start doing a little bit of a change. Instead of the agencies funding and managing and reporting the work that's going on, the MWPA would start taking the lead on that and taking some of that burden off of our member agencies. And believe me, I have member agencies asking me when we were going to take that burden off their shoulders. The CEQA process remains the same. The implementation process, that's where, again, we start taking a lot more ownership in implementing. And in the local mitigation projects, by design, that doesn't change. We are a funding agency and we just contribute to support our member agencies. So what does 3B look like staffing wise? If you look at this organizational chart, the blue is what's existing and the green is what we are proposing. And I'm going to start left and work right. We propose 2 vegetation management specialists. One of them would be a pass-through and a zero net budget change for the MWPA, and that would be bringing chipper days from Fire Safe Marin back into MWPA. Fire Safe Marin has asked to offload that responsibility. They took it on because when we were developing the organization, we didn't have the bandwidth to manage chipper days. They want to focus on public education and not focus on project work. So they're asking for us to take that back. For the remainder of this fiscal year, we already have funding for a veg management specialist to manage the chipper days. So bringing that position in the WPA is a zero cost for us. And as we build future chipper programs, it would be the same thing. And we would either pay for that type of position at Fire Safe Marin to manage, or we fund it internally. It's where the second veg management specialist, that's where we would have an impact to our budget. It would be an operational person, it's not an administrative person, so it would come out of core project costs. And it's the person that's out in the field implementing these projects with the work crews. And this will offload the work that Kate Anderson is doing in Santa Fe, that Todd Lando is doing in Central Marin. And I can just, Jordan Reeser at the county, I can just keep going down the list of names, the people that are implementing this work. By us having it internal, then we can offload their work. And part of this, I don't have the salary numbers for you right now, but that is part of this proposal, is that we would be seeking that out. These next 2 positions, the wildfire mitigation specialist or WIMS lead and wildfire mitigation specialist or WIMS. These are if needed. And as I mentioned earlier, the defensible space portion of our budget was originally intended that MWPA would be the overall employer of the D-space inspectors. And it was an opt-out for the agencies not to do their own inspections. In fact, annually, I'm supposed to receive a letter from each agency opting out of the D-space program. And so I see the potential of several agencies opting out of at least the management portion of their evaluators. And that's, so we need to be able to create the budgets or the position for a WIMS lead. And then we also need to create positions for the inspectors should we have agencies that opt out. The funding for this would all come from the public or the DSpace budget, the 20% of our DSpace. And so the member agencies that would be using our WIMS lead and our WIMS inspectors, they would be pulled from that, those salaries would be pulled from the DSpace funding, and it would not be a pass-through through those agencies any longer. The administrative analyst, that would be a position that is kind of a jack of all trades in the admin world in public government. It would be someone that is going to support the agenda development, which right now I'm the person that supports all the agenda development. And with 6 Brown Act meetings in December, it's obviously occupying quite a bit of my time. And I think my time can be much better spent at strategic level work rather than administrative type work, developing budgets. Another example is after we have a meeting and we have ordinances or resolutions that need to be signed or contracts that need to be signed, I'm the one that's distributing all of the documents, getting them signed and then filing them. Then day-to-day communications, whether it's managing our website, responding to information on our social media, phone calls, it's all landing on Ann and myself to take care of that. So the addition of the administrative analysts will actually allow Ann and I to really focus on our positions. The positions I've discussed so far would be MWPA employees, and we see them as 1 FTE, except to where you see the 2 spots that I have a 2. The grant specialist, I think we can tackle that with a 0.5 FTE as a contractor. And that would be a person that is facilitating our application of grants, managing the receipt of grants from whether it's state or federal agencies, and then also connecting with our veg management specialists and our WIMS folks in the distribution of our grants to our residents. And this is a chart that shows how 3B can be tailored to how a particular agency would like to be involved with their core projects. And these are just theoretical examples. It could be that, let's say Santa Fe decides, you know what, we can handle about 50% of the core work. So we'll take on 50% of the core work. MWPA, you guys take on the other 50%. Novato has expressed a desire to manage their core projects, and that's completely within their purview. So you'll see not 90% of the work being done by MWP or Novato, 10%, chipper days, educational grant management, that would be managed by the MWPA and then so on. And again, these are just theoretical numbers, just to give you a display of how we could be adaptable through 3B, option 3B. And then just some quick, very down and dirty position descriptions for the positions that we're talking about, and whether it's 1 FTE or 2 FTEs, if they're MWPA employees or if they're contractors. And they're actually listed in what Ann and I feel are the priority for hiring. We really think that we need to get the administrative analyst on board. It's that way Ann and I can focus on the work we really need to do. Veg management specialist, like I said, the first FTE would be no cost to the MWPA, and that's because the position's already funded through chipper days. The grant specialist, I believe we can fund that through our admin fees that we can build into our grant requests, as well as a portion of the set-asides that we put for our resident grants. Monies in that portion can fund the management of those positions. And then the WIMS lead and the WIMS, like I said, they're if needed, if agencies opt out of their or choose not to opt out for local the DSpace evaluations. And again, they would be funded through the DSpace budget allocation and prorated for the agencies that are using it. And finally, next steps and timeline. We would like to have the board of directors direct staff to create detailed position descriptions, salary surveys, create human resources policies, because if we're going to be bringing more employees on board, we need to have much more robust HR policies than we currently have. And to create a full package to submit to the board of directors at the February meeting. We are also, in order to do this, we would need to onboard a 20-hour a week or a half-time human resources specialist from regional government services, so that they can focus on that position description, salary surveys, and policy development, because quite frankly, we don't have the bandwidth internally to get that done. And then onboard a 20-hour a week administrative analyst that would really focus on the agenda development, records management, and actually set up the records management system that we're ready to launch. We just haven't had time to launch it. And then also prepare for when we get a full-time administrative analyst that would have much broader details. And with that, I'll stop sharing and go to questions.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jean, Gabe, and Mark for framing this up. I want to say, having been on the committee, that there was a tremendous amount of background work, analytical work, pages and pages and pages. There, we actually got to meet several times face-to-face, whiteboard. The bottom line is that there was a tremendous amount of analysis that was done. And what Mark really didn't say, which I would like to say, having been part of that, is that this model is at the request of our member agencies. We didn't make this up. We didn't fabricate it at the ad hoc committee level. After meeting 2, Mark was commissioned by the ad hoc to go back to members and poll them and ask them what's working, what's not, what do you need, and please compile a package of what your needs are. And this is the end result. It is the ATC and ops saying, please help. We're not going to be able to get this done without it. So I see this as a rock solid package that is, we're not requesting it as a committee. Our member agencies are requesting this collectively, and there's flexibility and in essence, to allow Novato to continue to do what we want, and to help Russ Marin, who's in great need, and others who are saying that we need some assistance. So I just wanted to lay that ground, and the request is to allow Mark and get some help to do the analysis and bring a proposal to the board. It's actually for them to be able to flesh this out in detail and to bring it to the full board. So our job here is just to say, is this properly targeted or not? I think I'd like to frame that up. So Sasha, you've had your hand up for 10 minutes. I know you have some questions.
Thank you. And I'll agree with what you said. I think that the way that this was framed up was really excellent. Are we a funding agency or an implementation agency? I think that's a really excellent way to look at it. But are we a funding or implementation agency for what? And we're talking about core projects, but core projects could be fuels reduction work, or it could be, alert systems, evacuation planning, all that kind of stuff. So everything you were talking about really is more about fuels reduction, right? So
those are the examples I use, but your examples are well taken, and that's where we're funding Zone Haven, so that's a core project.
Right. So we're not going to give Novato 90% of the Zone Haven money, for example, and have them do it. So just wanted to kind of understand.
Yeah.
That's one of my questions.
Yeah, that 10% little piece was that type of stuff.
Yeah, okay. So really all of this is talking about the fuels reduction projects, which is kind of the big part of what we're here for, and the harder part. But I think it would be important to communicate that because core projects is more than just that, and we want to make sure that fits in, because I don't want to set up an expectation too with a member agency like hey, we thought you're just going to take the core money and just split it down the middle, or just to make that a little bit more clear.
That's an excellent point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And then if there is, if like Novato, for example, is executing their own core projects, how do we track that accountability for what was done, so that we can be accountable to the COC and the public on okay, we had them do the work. Like how does that feed back in when we're just the funder?
The good news is that we are essentially serving as the funders, and that's what we're doing now. And Elisa Schiffman and the finance team has those the spreadsheets show the invoices coming in from San Rafael and us paying that. So it's already being tracked.
Okay. And then we also have in the JP agreement or if it was in the tax measure, somewhere in there, there's some equalizing across zones over a period of years. Can you remind me of what that is and how this fits into that as well?
80% of the revenue generated, so for core, 80% of the revenue generated within a geographical area must be spent in that geographical area over a 5-year average. And so in order to accomplish that, we have set thresholds or target limits for core project development within those areas within reason. But that's how we intend to accomplish that.
Yeah, because although I like that as a general principle, since it's 80%, we've got only 20% wiggle room. It's likely that there is, just more vegetation in one zone than another, or that there's more kind of deferred maintenance in one zone or another, or that there is more work that would have greater impact in one zone or another. So, we don't have the flexibility because that's written into our governance. But what my worry would be that if you have, let's just say that there's one zone where it really doesn't need as much work as another one, let's say. And now, over the 5 years, I don't want to get into a position where we're like, okay, now we got to hurry up and figure out how to spend this money just uselessly on something, is there, how do we deal with that, that type of problem?
By looking forward, like you are suggesting, and making sure that we are staying close to that 80%. And then if we decide the Superfund, I'll use West Marin as an example, because the coastal zone is going to increase the costs for our environmental compliance significantly. We may decide to Superfund West Marin for a year, and then we'll have to have a plan over the next 3 years to be able to do the catch up. And so that has been a very frequent conversation within the operations committee. And so when we've been the finance ad hoc of the operations has been built into into their budgeting planning.
Okay, good. Because just the monitoring of all of that and making sure, I know you've done a lot of systems development work to kind of try to, as you've mentioned there, but that's not in necessarily in there in the staff. It's kind of woven into some of that, but also just kind of wanting to make sure that that's, that we're keeping an eye on all that too.
We are.
Yeah.
In fact, we are tracking chipper days, what percent work of chipper days is being done in one zone compared to the other to track that. Yeah.
So that would be great to communicate when you communicate this out again, like, how we are making sure we're not going to be in trouble on those fronts. Okay. Yeah, those were my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sashi. Other directors, questions? Julie McMillan, please.
I think this is great. I really appreciate all the deep thought and analysis that's gone into this. I think when it's presented to the board, it would be helpful to reiterate the point that Bruce made at the end about this being driven by the local agencies, because that kind of frames it up and underscores the urgency and the need. And I was wondering, in light of the potential to hire these new people, is that bumping up into our administrative cost cap? How does that work?
The administrative assistant would be the only person that would bump into our administrative costs. And we haven't done the detailed budget analysis, but I think it would bring us to about 75 to 80% of our administrative budget cap.
And the rest of the people are coming out of the core funding?
The veg management specialist ×2 would come out of core funding, and the WIMS would come out of DSpace funding.
Okay, I think it'd be important to have a little section in the presentation so that, people don't get freaked out that we're hiring, that we need to hire more people, and what the source is.
I can build that into that org chart pretty easily.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Great questions. Let's see. I think Gabe was up and then Dennis. Am I correct? Yeah, Gabe.
Thank you. Yeah, why don't let Dennis go first? I just wanted to make a kind of an observation.
Oh, okay. Dennis, please.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. really, really good work. I think you did a great job of identifying the issues and proposing a solution. You know, I think identifying that getting projects done is really important. And I think what I propose is a question: does the solution you're proposing actually resolve that issue, or what's the guarantee that that resolves that issue, if there is one or can be one? Because as I realize in the county, projects sort of have a life of their own sometimes, and there's so many things outside of your control. So you could build the best team in the world and you're still not going to get the project done until it's all the I's have been dotted and all the T's have been crossed and everything's been, you know, put in the package where it can be done. And so that's primarily my question. I guess back to the subcommittee if they thought about that. And then the other, maybe if it is a concern how we build this team out, I don't think the public in voting for Measure W thought of this as a big agency with a lot of employees. And so I think we should remember that and maybe look at something the county uses very efficiently, fixed term employees, which means that often at the end of the budget, if they're not renewed, that position goes away. And as we're building this, we're sort of flying at the same time. We really don't know how this is all going to turn out. So, you know, I would hate to be in a position where we hire a lot of permanent employees or so-called permanent employees with permanent positions and then not know what we're going to do with them in another budget year because, you know, the plane's shifted a little bit and gone another direction. And so I think we should be cautious of that, even though many of these employees may be getting paid for out of other funds. We should be sensitive to that should the agencies want those funds back, what happens to the employees, for example,
Yeah.
you know, in another budget year. So I think we need to think about that as we build this team up. And I think that's important. I don't know if there's any positions that could be contract positions for, you know, a budget year or two to see how it works out, if that's an option. And then I am a little worried about administrative costs because I'm hopeful the agencies that are now passing this money essentially back to MWPA understand that they won't have administrative money for some of this stuff possibly too, or some of that will go away. So I don't want to have a situation where some of the agencies love this idea, but they didn't think they were going to lose some of the administrative money that they actually are using now. And I think that needs to be clear to them so that they understand. And I am concerned about the overall administrative costs if we hire a lot of people. So those are my questions, but really good job, Gabe. Good job. Your team did a great job. And Jean, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. Those are really great questions and comments, really. Mark, is there, do you want to respond to?
I'll respond to his second.
We did talk, I want to say that we did speak as a committee, Dennis, that projects, what we're doing is not new. It's not rocket science. It takes staff to identify what needs to be done where, to do the survey work, to do the characterization of what your current condition, desired future condition. It takes staff to write contracts. Then you have to advertise it, and then there's implementation staff, and then monitoring. These are not add-ons. These are conventional organizational structures that are critical to being successful in implementation. So I think there's a communication opportunity there, a messaging opportunity, Mark, and responding to you, Dennis, and really great question, that we need to be very clear that, you know, getting work done, you have to spend money to make money. You have to have staff in place to get work done, and whether it's at the member level or whether it's at the organizational level. So Mark, I think maybe Dennis has raised a really interesting communication challenge for us to the public. I think in regards to administrative costs, we also talked as a committee, and it wasn't spoken, but that we do need to be clear as a JPA, clearly defined, and we might need Megan's support for this, just what constitutes administration and what constitutes project implementation. And so Mark is slicing this really quick. You know, we've got this little bit is administration, and the rest of this is, but I think we need to be maybe investigate that a little bit more deeply and make sure that we we're clear on that we communicate it, I think that's an opportunity. On the fixed term, and I think that those are great questions that Mark, you're commissioning Mark and Ann to investigate that. And I think we're all concerned about not building it's not about building an organization, it's about getting the work done. We have a 10-year commission, we're 2 years into it already, and it's going to be, anyway, so I really appreciate your comments, Dennis. Mark, I don't know if
I was going to touch on the fixed term component and the using contractors, and then a little bit about the administrative. And then I was going to punt to Rachel, because Rachel asked almost that same, your first question was almost exactly the same question she asked 2 days ago. I am a fan of fixed term, probably because I grew up in the county government. And by definition, the WPA is fixed term. And I think that is probably, to be fair to any employees that we bring on, fixed term may be the fairest, so that they have realistic expectations of what their tenure with the organization may or may not be. I'm also a fan of starting people off as contract employees. I see that as an excellent interview period. And if that contractor works, then we bring them on as permanent employees or fixed term employees. If the contractor doesn't work, we find someone that works better. So I think that's a great interview process. And then as far as administrative costs, the finance committee agenda is pretty full for the 13th, but we are targeting a future finance committee meeting to explore the definition of administrative costs to make a recommendation to the full board. And for the first question you asked, Dennis, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel, because she asked that same question.
I did ask the same question. Good question. So what we had talked about is, how do we know if this worked? And I think that, Dennis, that's sort of where you're getting at, is how do we know? And I think what we've done in our conversation was really to look at a recommendation that provides a lot of flexibility. So we know today is not working because we know we want to accomplish more, and we just don't have the right mix isn't there. So the recommendation is really an approach to have a different mix, but it will require us to look back. Are we going to see that for the next year and a half? It doesn't happen in months, right? We're not talking about months. We're talking about a year and a half, which is sort of where we are today, a year and a half in. Are we able to accomplish more? What is the feedback? What are those 5 questions the agencies need to answer? It's working better, the staffing's better, I'm able to have, whatever those questions are, we need to have those questions in place. So we asked it today and we ask it in a year and a half. And if it's not right, we'll need to adjust again. And I think that this model allows for that with the flexibility and staffing, but we can't just sit and say, well, it's not working. We hope it's going to change. And so this is really the approach from the committee, was in terms of talking about what can we do to make it different and what are we going to introduce. But we do need to be really aware of it. We can't just sit back and say we fixed it. It's, that may not be the case.
If I may just intercede for a moment and apologize to everyone that, and thank Megan for being patient with us, that we've gone directly into discussion prior to public comment, but I think it's compelling, and the questions that Dennis asked and others. With your patience, please be patient with us, that Gabe has raised his hand, and I do think we should move on to public comment and then get back to discussion here shortly. So Gabe, please, and then let's try to move to the public. Or other questions, please. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I guess I just wanted to chime in because I believe Dennis's and Julie's questions really were something that we talked about earlier, and I wanted to see the responses before I said anything. So I want to circle back to the ad hoc analysis with 2 brief comments, one strategic and one tactical. The strategic point is a little bit more what Dennis was asking and Rachel was just talking about, how do we know that we succeed? And I would really urge this group and the board as a whole to rather quickly develop some draft metrics. And on the back of an envelope, I wrote draft metrics in our meeting, and they go something like this. How many DSpace, evaluations have you done? How many roads have you cleared? How much evac is now, et cetera, acreage of I think we could start with something that's not perfect because, perfectionism will get in the way of, just getting something done. So I would love to see 4 metrics or 5 metrics, and then let's apply them to 2021. And I think Anne did a great job of giving us a start. We could do that, and that really becomes the measure. Our model now, our hypothesis testing is, a control group is last year and then next year, and we'll see. So that's pretty obvious, but I hope we can do that, before this all rolls out too far. My second point is the tactical one, and I think most of you and your agencies are seeing the challenges in hiring. I mean, we're trying to get a planning director now for months, and we're rolling that over. So one of the messages, which is a money message, and I think we need to communicate to everybody, especially like Cost Marin and so forth, is that we're like a startup. And you're sometimes front heavy. If I have a great idea and you guys are venture capitalists, I'm going to tell you I'm going to be a loss leader and burn through cash in the first 2 years, but give me some time. And I think with the drought conditions, there's a double urgency in saying deliver, deliver, deliver. Scope comes first, timing comes second, and cost comes last. And we'll invert that in year 3. We need to get stuff done, and we will stay within our budget because we didn't even burn enough money. So to that point, let's look at 1099s. Let's look at remotes, on the org chart. Obviously your vegetation management have to be local, but anything that we can get done any which way, a 3-month, 6-month, 12-month contract is really better than waiting. So I hope we can just keep this, momentum going. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. Really great additions. And Mark, I think that it broadens, some of the work that you'll need to do in the background, and great suggestions, Gabe. The monitoring and the metrics, and it should be part of the ultimate package and the presentation of the board. So questions or comments here from the board yet? Really fantastic so far. Let's move on to Allison, please, and the public. Any public comment on this item?
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Okay, thanks all. Back to the committee. Any further discussion? There's no, Julie, thank you, please.
I just wanted to say, I really appreciate Gabe's comments. And I think in our minds, we need to be focused on building a case both for the short term and for the long term. And that maybe that could be the theme of the presentation to the board, and that other people will see. And they'll realize that this may be an upfront investment, but long term, it's going to pay dividends.
Wonderful.
And if I can touch on the objectives and metrics, having sat in on the development of the objectives and metrics, I think what that group is building is going to align with this effort very, very well. And we are targeting a February presentation to the board on the objectives and metrics.
Great, wonderful. Well, fantastic, fantastic discussion. I think that this input is being invaluable, Mark. I think it's only going to enrich the package and really broaden the breadth of broaden what it is that this proposal is. So I really appreciate board and all. Jean, please.
Yeah. Just a question. This is not technically an action item. However, the executive committee perhaps it would be helpful to clarify that the executive committee would recommend this proposal going forward with some additional information that's been provided by the board. So I just want to make it clear that direction has been given, and Mark is to take this to the board, and hopefully the board will find it to be of interest and give further direction.
Thank you, Jean. That is an important point. Let's see, Megan, board, any thoughts on that? We are sending a message, I guess, is what Jean is suggesting.
Right, and we didn't seek a motion for a formal recommendation, but I think it would suffice to say that if everyone is comfortable with sort of providing consensus support for this to the board, that's really all it would take, so that that would reflect your support for this presentation and for the proposal.
Okay, so that's the question. Is everyone supportive in Mark forwarding this, advancing the package? And I see everyone saying yes. Thank you, Gene.
And if I could just close, yeah, thank you very much, Gene. And if I can just close with a couple thoughts of continuing to solicit input and garner support. Literally sitting behind me is the Marin Managers Association meeting. And so after I get out of this meeting, I'm actually going to be giving them a very similar presentation that you guys just received to get their feedback, input, and support. And then advisory technical will have that same opportunity, as well as operations, prior to the board meeting on the 16th.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, thanks, committee. Wonderful. Let's move on to item B, the Citizen Oversight Committee. Mark, let's see, I know that Larry Chu was supposed to join us, but I believe that it'll be Lucy Dilworth. Mark, do you want to introduce this topic, please?
Absolutely. We had our deliberation at our last executive meeting about the agenda item of a COC report. And we had very thorough deliberations, and we walked away with the idea that it really is the chair's purview to identify what the agenda items are going to be. There, quite frankly, there wasn't strong support there was strong support for finance committee involvement, not necessarily strong support for executive committee. Following that meeting, I thought the COC had one of its best deliberations, discussions about how they can most effectively move forward with that. And I'll pass it off to Lucy to describe that.
Thanks, Mark. Good morning, executive committee members. Just to let you know, I'm standing in for Larry Chu, who is our chair, but I will be the incoming chair in December. So in essence, we're revising our policies and procedures to determine our rules of engagement with the board. We feel that we should make some guardrails and define how we're going to be organizing ourselves, who will be speaking and when. In essence, really, I refer you to the staff report and the video of our last November meeting. So I think that we covered everything in that meeting except for one additional element that we were going to be adding, which is, and has not yet been approved, but we're going to be bringing it up in our revised draft, and that there is going to be a rule where only all communications with the board are going to go through the executive officer. And we feel that's going to keep things tidy and organized. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Lucy. So yeah, there is a staff report here. It does summarize what preceded last month's discussion, and there were questions regarding and concerns about the COC possibly going into an advisory role. The COC has clarified that they are their attempt to be more proactive, and the appreciative inquiry techniques is what I appreciate from those notes, that this indeed is asking questions for the board to consider. So are any questions or comments from the board on this matter? Julie, please.
Lucy, I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on the last point that you just made, that all communications with the board will go through the executive officer. Does that mean that no COC member will be speaking directly to the board?
This has to be fleshed out because we didn't actually have an opportunity to discuss it that thoroughly. But in essence, I think the idea is that we will not have a number of different people expressing different points of view and in any sense of lobbying. So if there is a communication that somebody has that they want to bring to a board member, they will go through Mark, and Mark will advise as to whether or not this is something that should go through or might express a better method of explaining what the concern is. In general, I think we want to really tighten up and make sure that what the COC decides is the decision of the entire body and not any other thoughts and expressions should be contained, and the decision should rest with the entire body.
So Mark's serving as the gatekeeper in essence.
Yes, I might add though there might be an extra element, which is maybe also the chair might communicate, but this hasn't been discussed. So we'll need to finesse that a little and as we discuss it.
Thank you, Julie. Thanks, Lucy, for your clarification. Other board members, questions, comments? Let's move on to the public, please, for any public comment.
Looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Okay, so just back to the committee for any further discussion. I'm seeing, Julie, yes, please, and Dennis.
I just wanted to make a comment that when the COC was formed, we purposefully decided to appoint people who are advocates of various groups and positions and things like that. And I watched the tape and I really appreciate the deliberations that you all had in terms of not prioritizing your own unique perspective, but making sure that the communication is on behalf of the entire COC. And I know that's a delicate balance to strike given the composition of the COC, but I think, ultimately by having strong advocates, it makes the COC stronger. And I appreciate that everyone's willing to put the overall conditions on the communications. I think that's a really good balance. So thank you.
Thanks for your comments, Julie. Dennis, please.
Yeah, Bruce, I just wanted to mention, I'm glad to kind of see this wrapping up. I think it's probably time the Citizens Oversight Committee get to the work they're supposed to be doing. We have a year-end budget, I think, or financial review probably coming up pretty soon if it hasn't started already. And I just think it's time for that to start happening and move forward. At the same time, we're responsible for governance. And if you step into that arena, we're going to step on your toes and tell you about it. And that needs to be clear that, we're responsible for the JPA and the governance of it. And the COC is responsible, in my mind, for financial oversight. And if you cross those lines, whoever's president will be coming back to you and telling you that pretty shortly after that occurs. So, but looking forward to a great working relationship. You've been good partners in the past, good partners in the ballot measure, and we look forward for that to continue.
Thanks, Dennis. I think everyone's nodding. Board members, any other discussion? Okay, I just like to close this by, it was mentioned previously that granting the chairs of Ops, Finance, and Executive Committee to agendize, and given this clarification that this is really an attempt for them to be more proactive and to get things done more quickly. I'd like to give this a try, agendize this year. And give it time. And as Dennis said, we'll assess it. If it's working, great. If it's not working, we're going to fix it. So with your permission, please, I really respect all the comments. And the only time I've gone back and looked at a meeting recording is to go back and look at our previous executive committee meeting to see what your thoughts were on this. And I think your concerns have been addressed. So that's what I'd like to do going forward here, is to agendize COC and see how it works. So thanks very much. Let's move on to item number 8. This is the proposed process for executive officer annual performance and pay review. Megan, it looks like you're going to present this to us.
Yes, thank you, Bruce. And we're fortunate that Jean is here as well, so she'll be able to speak to any questions that the board may have. But the committee, sorry, but at the last board meeting, we approached the board about a process for doing the executive officers evaluation and got sort of into the weeds there, in particular about the criteria to be used for evaluation. And a concern was raised about it being very time consuming and maybe even postponing it and that type of thing. So following that meeting, I reached back out to Jean and had a great discussion with her about her approach. And I think that she may actually provide a great option for the board and just for MWPA in general, at least for this first round of annual evaluation for Mark. As we do want to get that going. It's in his contract, and I understand that it's already a little bit delayed, but we'd like to get that evaluation taken care of. So Jean has a very straightforward process that she's tested in other JPAs and other organizations. And so I think we're fortunate that we already have her under contract, and it's a contract that allows us to extend this type of, or request this type of work from her. And so we're looking for the executive committee to consider just hiring Jean and sort of leaving it in her hands to come up with the appropriate criteria and process. And then also to have the executive committee make a recommendation to the board that she do that work and that the executive committee be the primary reviewing body. And then the board would be just involved with the negotiations as recommended by the executive committee. So it's a pared down version of what we have brought to you before, but hopefully this is more in line with what you were anticipating. And again, Jean is here if you have questions about her process, and I'm happy to answer questions if I can.
Thanks, Megan. So Jean, are you going to give us a little backgrounder?
Just briefly, Bruce, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I've been doing key executive evaluations now for over 10 years, post departure from full-time work in public service. And I've got as Megan described, a very flexible tool that can incorporate many of the criteria that Mark identified for you last time in a way that's consolidated and gives him the opportunity to comment on things that are important to him, and give the executive committee the opportunity to reflect on that and then report out about the challenges and opportunities going forward. And then addresses compensation issues, does a survey and evaluation as best we can. That part is probably going to be the most difficult component, because there aren't very many comparable agencies that are doing this kind of work, but we can certainly give you a range of options to choose from in terms of compensation and pay and benefits. And so it's a fairly expedient process, and generally the executive officer's self-evaluation is completed first and then distributed to the executive committee. So you've got substance from which to reflect and evaluate. And so that's it. Some other agencies choose to go with different tools, and I've used those as well. And this process seems to be most productive. Even the ones that have started out with other tools have frequently gone in this direction on after several of the evaluations. And so that's it in a nutshell. I'm prepared to start on this work probably late December, and would be happy to do so. It would be a pleasure to work with you all. The primary structure of the tool will be familiar to Dennis and to Sashi, for instance, and some of the other board members. We used it for Marin Telecommunications Agency before that agency was dissolved. And it's just a very flexible and easy to use tool.
Thanks, Jean. Thanks for the clarifying comments. And I see others nodding their heads. Any board members, questions or comments? I see none. Let's move out to the public for any comment on this, please.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Okay, thanks. Back to the board. Any further discussion? Discussion and a motion, please. So we would need a motion to support advancing this to the full board.
I'm happy to make a motion to move forward with the exec committee evaluation process.
Thank you, Rachel.
I'll second.
And Julia's motion and second, Jill McMillan. Thank you so much. Allison, please.
Nevada Fire District,
Aye.
County of Marin,
Aye.
City of Mill Valley,
Aye.
Town of Ross,
Aye.
City of San Rafael.
Aye.
The motion passes.
Thank you, board members, Jean and all. Thank you so much, and Megan. Let's move on to informational item number 9, the expenditure of MWPA funds on public lands. Mark, there's a good package in the packet here, so I don't think you need to repeat a lot of what's in there, but please let us know what you got there.
No, I'll frame it up and just give a really broad outline. And it going through this process really made me appreciate all the people and all the energy that went into building the JPA and the language of the JPA and the language of the ordinance. When the question was asked, all of the details were part of the original documentation. So I appreciate the original authors. And the question was, is it appropriate for an MWPA to expend Measure C funds on public lands? And actually, what's kind of funny is I've actually received the other side of that question. Is it appropriate for MWPA to spend Measure C funds on private lands? And the same process answers that same question. And I'm just going to hit the highlights. And that is going into the ordinance where it defines what we do, but there's specifically what defines a member agency and what defines a member agency jurisdiction. And so when you look at the maps that define our member agency jurisdictions, it clearly covers all of the JPA area, obviously excluding Tiburon and Belvedere as not being JPA areas. We also conferred with 2 of the key authors, and that is Chief Weber and Stephen Robb from the County Council. And they confirmed our conclusion that by defining member and taxing entity, which also equals member agency jurisdictions, looking at CSA 13, 19, CSA 31, looking at each of the member agency jurisdictions, they overlap all of our public and private lands within the MWPA jurisdiction. So it was our staff's conclusion that we can. It was confirmed by Chief Weber, confirmed by Stephen Robb that was the appropriate conclusion. And I'll just close by saying the emphasis that Chief Weber put on was that, well, it needs to be a partnership with the public land management agencies. If we're going to become doing projects on their lands, it shouldn't be only Measure C funding. It needs to be a partnership with that member agent, with the public land agency. And I think by including the public land agencies into our advisory technical committee, that is going as non-voting members, that is going to allow for that partnering of funding much easier than had we not done that. And with that, I'll take questions.
Thanks, Mark. Sashi, please.
Thank you. I appreciate the way that you framed this, but the part that is not quite answered for me is there's specifically, I think this came up in relation to state parks, and you have a nuance there where Marin County Fire has some suppression responsibility for the state parks area because of the CAL FIRE, because we're a CAL FIRE contract county, but state parks also has its own fire prevention responsibility also. So there are 2 agencies that have fire prevention responsibility for those lands. So you could say, well, look, this is it's Marin County Fire, so it's they're a member agency and it's covered. But Marin County Fire and state parks have fire prevention responsibility. So what I would love to see addressed in this when it comes to the board, just to adding this nuance in those cases, you mentioned that we don't want MWPA funds to supplant the funds of our member agencies, but we also don't want them to supplant state parks funds. State parks got $80 million this year. I don't know what our division got, but they got a lot of money this year to do fire prevention. And I know it hasn't come through yet. And I know, Mark, you've been in contact with our division representative there, but I'd love to have that piece be specifically addressed in there. And if you want to just answer how we're dealing with that for this particular round, and then how that would change kind of going forward, given that they have, potentially significantly more money, you know, for state parks.
Well, and I want to clear up a common misconception that about state parks, and that that a state park is automatically SRA, and therefore that it is either CAL FIRE's responsibility or not. And that's not the case. Simply the fact that it's state ownership doesn't make it SRA. And Angel Island is a perfect example. Angel Island is a state park. It is not SRA. It is within the Tiburon town limits. And so therefore County Fire doesn't have that fire jurisdictional authority, or CAL FIRE does not. In fact, Tiburon has to have a wildfire prevention or wildfire contract with CAL FIRE to provide wildfire protection services on Angel Island. And so it's much more like Marin County Parks and Open Space relationship with County Fire. If if a Marin County Park is within County Fire's jurisdiction, then County Fire is that fire agency. It has fire prevention authority. For the parks that are within, using Novato as an example, it's Novato Fire that has the fire authority and prevention authority. And Marin County Parks and state parks that have land management responsibility by definition, but they don't technically have fire prevention responsibility, and it just falls within their land management responsibilities.
Got it. That's an important clarification. I really appreciate you bringing that up. That said, state park specifically just got a chunk of money for this specific purpose.
Yep.
So yeah, and I know that you've been in conversation with our division person, and if you want to, can you give us an update on that, or how does that tie in? And I appreciate you making that distinction, because I think it is important. It's not just automatically SRA, but they have been given money to do this.
Yeah, and that was one of the advantages of our trip on the Woodward fire, is I had the regional superintendent walking side by side with me on the trail, and we had long conversations about that. She at that time did not know how much of that money would be coming into state parks, but she is fully engaged in wildfire mitigation through those monies. And so we have, I believe it's Bree Hardcastle from State Parks as part of our advisory technical committee, and that'll be our connection to make sure that they're exercising those funds here in Marin. And I'll add that in when we present to the, we're presenting this to the advisory technical operations, finance, and then the full board. So everybody's
okay. Yeah, I'd appreciate if you can put that clarification in, because that it's really, you know, one of our big guiding principles is that we're trying to, leverage all the funds and, kind of magnify them. And this is one where, right now there's wildfire money being kind of thrown around the state, and not always in a way that we would anticipate. So we should be able to feed that in so that we're leveraging our dollars and not supplanting dollars that would have been spent already. So I would appreciate that if you can include that.
Thank you.
One quick follow-up, if I could, Bruce. We are actually doing an analysis of the land management agencies right now, how much money within their jurisdiction, and actually getting a per acre value to that.
That's excellent. And actually, if you would put that in, that would be really helpful to know in this context. I think that would be really helpful to know. Thanks.
Really great point, Sashi. And you know that we have a good number of members of the COC listening in today. And this is certainly part of their purview, is to make sure that those questions that you are asking, Sashi, are being fully addressed at the ATC level, ops before, and finance before we approve anything. So thanks. And let's see, I saw a hand. Was it Julie?
That was going to be my question as well. In your staff report, you have that MWPA's work complements agencies' efforts, and that the MWPA funds supplement wildfire prevention and mitigation activities on public lands. So I think if you just include a paragraph and maybe that chart that you just mentioned in the staff report, you would alleviate a lot of questions. I would make it stronger. So thank you.
Great feedback.
Thank you, Julie. Okay, duly noted. Thank you, board. Let's move on to the public then for comment, please.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there is no public comment.
Wonderful. Back to the board. Any further discussion, board members? I'm seeing none. All your comments are improvements to the package, and Mark duly noted. Good. And there's no motion required here. you'll do your work and bring it to the full board. Let's move on to board policies, election process, and succession of board president and vice president, and code of conduct. Mark, please.
And I will bring up that we had a technical difficulty in Granicus, and probably points to our need for an administrative analyst to support your executive officer in development of agenda packets. When I go into Granicus, it shows that every single one of the attachments for this agenda item are there. And I've published about 15 times to try to get it to show up in the packet. And I unfortunately did not realize we had that error until 9:40 this morning. So I do have the staff report and the policies available as a screen share. And I think we can probably work through this fairly easily, because you guys have seen all of this, and it was just some very, very minor tweaks that you had asked through the board meeting last month to bring to the executive committee. So part of it was to clarify that it would be an affirming vote, and what to do if that affirming vote of the vice president moving to the president did not occur. So we built that into the language, and also just clarifying the term 1 year as vice president, 1 year as president, as instead of the way it was written, it could have been construed that it was 2 years each. So, but it was meant to be that it was 2 years total, 1 year of each. So here's the actual board policy. And I will make sure it gets distributed to you folks after this meeting, whether I have to attach it or I finally get Granicus to work right. And then it will be posted appropriately in the board packet for Thursday, the 16th. But it's this portion right here, the having served for 2 years as officers, and by one newly, I'm trying to find a spot where it talks about 1 year. Let's see here. I'm sorry about this. This is definitely, there we go. The first year served as vice president, second year served as president. That was one of the requested changes at the meeting. And then this paragraph here is the component of making sure that it's in an affirming vote, and of what to do if there was no affirming vote. And my notes for the election process, those were the only changes requested. So I'll leave that here. And then the code of conduct, we received absolutely no comments for the code of conduct during the board meeting. So all I did was cut and paste that original document that was in the staff report into a more formal looking board policy. And with that, I'll stop the screen share and open to any questions from you all.
Thanks, Mark. Board members, any questions? And I am seeing none. Let's move out to the public, please.
I'm looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Okay, back to the board. Again, any discussion? And I'm seeing none. Wonderful. Thanks, Mark, and thanks team that did all that staff work. Great stuff to bring to the full board. Let's move to Board of Directors meeting agenda review, December 16th, 2021 board meeting draft agenda. Mark, please, again.
Yeah, it's a fairly, my apologies, in the month of December during the holiday period, it is going to be a fairly full agenda. There's going to be a lot of important items on it. And we do have an addition, and that is we'll be adding the strategic ad hoc recommendations as an action item. So we'll have a second action item on that agenda. And we will only have one compliance packet approval in this agenda, and that'll be for shaded fuel break in Mill Valley. And I'll ask Ann to expand on how she is planning to connect with any environmental stakeholders that may have concerns to avoid that the 2:30 memo for the 3 o'clock meeting.
Sure. I meet regularly once a month with environmental stakeholders well ahead of our board meetings to talk about future projects. But I'm going to add an additional conversation that will happen between the time when the agenda is posted and the environmental documents are available to the public, and before the board meeting, so that we can talk through any questions or concerns during that time as well.
And then if I like to get your guys' feedback on the educational item for December, and I did receive a suggestion from Dennis Rodoni, and that was a presentation from Woody Baker Cohn from County OES on Alert Marin.
Good. Okay, wonderful, thanks. Any questions? Julie, please.
I just have a question for Ann and Mark. If there is a, last minute letter from an environmental person, who is deciding whether it stays on the agenda or gets pulled?
That's up to board members to determine if you'd like to have additional discussion. I think one of the additional items I'm interested in agendizing is talking through the process for how we develop our environmental analysis, so you get an inside look into what that process looks like that happens behind the scenes, and so that you're more aware of all of the very in-depth analysis that happens even for a project that's exempt from CEQA.
And Julie, if I may expand, I think you have, there's two pieces of pulling that you might be talking about. If the content of the observation from our environmental stakeholder highlights something that we drastically missed, and we agree with that, Ann and I may decide just to take it out of the agenda. During the agenda adjustments, we could say, you know what, this pocket really wasn't ready. We would like to remove it from the agenda. And then as far as pulled for conversation, that's obviously to the board's responsibility. But again, both Ann and I would be able to have the flexibility of recommending pulling it for discussion.
I guess when something is not urgent, it really bothers me to have a letter. I'm sure it bothers you guys even more to have a letter come in, 12 hours before the meeting. And then we have an enormous effort from Ann and consultants and outside lawyers to rebut whatever the letter says, or more fully address what the recommendation already contains. And it just, I know that costs a lot of money when it's done urgently like that. And it's probably not, the memo that Ann created for the last meeting, I thought was excellent, but it may not always allow us enough time to create our best product. So I think some consideration needs to be made if there is a last minute item and the work is not urgent. It doesn't need to be approved at that board meeting. Maybe there should be some consideration about continuing it to a subsequent meeting.
Thank you, Julie. And I had some discussions with Ann and Mark, basically to that effect. That we could, rather than have it, that we could actually postpone it and move on with other business, that which is not critical. That was my suggestion to Ann off record, but I think your suggestion is excellent. If it's not urgent, let's give time for that letter to be digested, responded to, and interaction out of, you don't have to have 17 board members and the public go through this deliberation. We could respond, and then at that point in time, the environmental community, those concerns, we would have addressed them, and they can make a decision at the next meeting. If they still want to come at us, we will have had this dialogue already. So thanks, Julie. Ann, remember that? I'm sorry. Rachel, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I am in agreement with that. I think it is really our choice. We can respond or not respond. Public comment is public comment. City of San Rafael, it submits on the record with our agenda that says public comment can be submitted up to a certain time. And maybe we want to just include that on the agenda. that it can be submitted. I mean, people can speak anytime at public comment, but they're limited to that, whatever that clock time is. So I think but it's our choice. And then if we end up choosing to delay a vote on something, because that also then goes into the factor of we're delaying the project, and that time gets built in to potentially delaying the implementation. It may be worth it, it may not be worth it, but we just need to be taking that into consideration as well, as the community responds. But it is absolutely not, we're not obligated at all to respond within hours to a public comment. And I think that, again, totally appreciate the team who did that. I wouldn't say that's the right precedent to set.
Thank you, Rachel. Sashi, please.
Rachel said a lot of the stuff I was going to say, but I'll just add on that, yes, you do not have to respond, but we also should look at this in the greater context. There are going to be, of course, some comments that come in sort of late in the game and people who engage late in the game. But what we've kind of set up is a system where staff is engaging with our kind of key stakeholders over a long period of time. So there are multiple points for input. And maybe what we need to do is be a little bit more, better about communicating what all of those things are, what all of the public, opportunities were for comment, and that gives us a stronger hand on being able to hold the line. As Rachel said, it makes absolutely no sense to divert all staff resources to engaging on a last minute comment. If it should be kind of noted that, this is something we've been developing over the course of several months. These have been all the public engagement opportunities. It might be something that we might consider figuring out how to communicate so that we have that strength to be able to hold the line.
Thanks, Sashi. Let's see. Megan, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention that part of the decision making and how to respond also has to do with just the nature of CEQA and the fact that whatever is in our administrative record is what we will live and die by if we are ever sued. And so we're pretty conscientious about trying to make that record as robust as possible. And sometimes a written record can be an easier one to access than say transcripts of a response by staff on the fly. So there's thought that goes into that's based on sort of imagining what this will look like in binders during a court hearing to some degree. So just wanted to add that piece of it. It's certainly not staff's preference either to divert resources and spend all that time, but in certain circumstances, just want to make a robust record for our defense.
Thank you, Megan. Anne, please.
One other thing to keep in mind is that if we do move a project to the following board meeting, we could still be receiving public comment through that meeting as well.
Right. Yeah, we're delaying. We're going to delay a decision, but continue the communication process. I want to commend Anne and Megan and our legal team, Remy Moose and Manley, the highest quality, most competent response that. And also just affirm that we're creating a record, a public record, and that fully responds to those questions, which is critical. We're vulnerable as an entity, and we're moving along. So far, I think the bar that we've raised is so high. The substantial record is it's beyond a high bar, and we're producing just a fabulous record, and to protect ourselves really. So anyway, thanks. I share all your concerns.
So this ties back into our educational item, and that Ann and I had discussed with Sabrina from Remy Moose Manley if she could deliver a 10-minute educational item at either the December or the January meeting about our approach on these packages. And so I'll look to you guys on timing of the OES presentation on Alert Marin versus the presentation from Sabrina.
Preferences? Mark, why don't we leave that?
I'd suggest, Bruce, you just see how it works out, see which one can come in December, which one can come in January. I don't think there's any urgency to either one.
Okay,
So we'll leave that in Mark and Ann's hands to make that determination.
will do.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, we're at public comment on the agenda. Any public comment, please, Allison?
Looking for any raised hands from our audience members. And there's no public comment.
Okay, well, there's any further discussion, folks. I think okay, let's move on to item 11. Any committee members have a request for future agenda items? Looks like we have our hands full as it is. Well, at 11:47, December 2nd, I'd like to adjourn this meeting and see you all at the board meeting on December 16th. So have a great afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for all your input.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.